Testing. 1, 2, testing. Testing. 1, 2, testing.
Good morning. Good morning to all the fellow South Africans, members of the media who are here, to the people of this country, I greet you. South Africa has always been a land of hope and resilience. We've faced adversity, we've faced it with courage and demonstrated our ability to overcome. Yet today it feels more than anything, as we prepare for the State of the Nation address, that we stand at a crossroad. We're confronting multiple crises that ultimately threaten our collective tomorrow. It bears no secret the fact that youth unemployment today is alarmingly high. Electricity supply has become unstable. Crime is rising, and joblessness continues to plague our nation. I think in truth, the greatest crisis we face today is that too many South Africans are living in poverty. It must disturb all of us when we hear of a mother who has to boil leaves just to feed her crying children. It must disturb all of us that too many of our citizens are food insecure. The crisis of poverty in our nation is one that cannot remain ignored. Fellow South Africans, along with many of our domestic challenges, we also face our foreign policy challenges. The statements by President Trump in the US and ultimately the DRC reflect a broader national and international struggle. One that oscillates between hope and despair, progress and stagnation. The promise of economic relief through expected interest rate cuts is often overshadowed by the weakening rand and global trade pressures. So it is against this backdrop that Thursday night's speech that will be tabled by President Cyril Ramaphosa when he delivers his annual State of the Nation address stands in the midst of public anxiety about the country's trajectory. The government of national unity was heralded as a fresh start for South Africans in a fairly fractured political landscape. However, 6 months into it, all of us are starting to feel that it has proven to be more of a political balancing act than a vehicle for substantive and material change. Internal disputes over key policy issues such as the Bella Act, the Expropriation Bill, the National Health Insurance, have expressed and demonstrated deep ideological rifts amongst coalition partners. Fellow South Africans, instead of fostering stability, the alliance of political rivals has resulted in policy stagnation, which ultimately means that it's an ANC-led governance prevailing as policy for our country rather than the supposed inclusion of opposition voices. South Africans were promised a new political era, one that is focused on economic revitalization and tangible improvements to their daily lives. Instead, the GNU's inability to agree and in many instances a lack of a coherent direction has left too many of the promises unfulfilled. It's why even this year, I look forward to the national dialogue which we called for in the beginning, because it will be important to lay out what the future of our nation must look like. As Build One South Africa, we invested significantly in being that centrist opposition, that party that wants to hold government accountable, that party that is committed to working with like-minded parties to be able to bring the centrist caucus and ultimately, in the next set of elections, deliver an alternative for South Africans. I have, over a number of times, given countless warnings against UN euphoria. This idea of blind optimism that sometimes that unity alone will solve the national crisis. this has not proven to be accurate. Hope, as one says, isn't a strategy. 6 months on, job creation remains stagnant, our education system continues to suffer structural failures, and public safety remains a persistent concern. What South Africans now need is not performative unity, but decisive leadership, a sound economic strategy, and a government that prioritizes citizens over political survival. Should the GNU survive, it will survive only on the basis of the fact that it's not just the number of parties in its rank, but it's whether it can deliver real change. It can give citizens freedom that materializes. Until then, we have a duty as the opposition to demand accountability and hold those in power accountable. It is against this backdrop to say, let us craft a different story, a different picture for what South Africa could be. We may have solved for the political problems, but let us work hard at solving now, today, for our economic crisis. And it's against this that I set out a plan on behalf of BOSA to revive South Africa's economic trajectory towards a rapid growth of 5% per annum. If South Africa is going to prosper, let me reiterate that, we will need 5% economic growth year on year to ensure that we begin to make a dent on unemployment, to ensure that our citizens can be optimistic and ultimately begin to resolve some of the crises that we face and the fiscal constraints that we have. It is a plan that is predicated on an integrated approach involving education, safety, and an efficient, corruption-free, ethical government. I say 5%, and yes, many people will challenge 5%. But I want to say to the people of this country, what we need again is a sense of ambition. The idea that we aim higher. That ultimately, against the GDP figures of Q3 of 2024 that confirm a contraction of 0.3%, a disappointing decline where market forecasts had anticipated growth, 5% is the least that we can aim for. We have to build, fellow South Africans, a shift for poor people to enter the middle class. And therefore our plan ultimately focuses on a growing and a resilient middle class, where South Africans who were told to expect economic progress under the GNU are witnessing stagnation. Today, with over 11 million unemployed South Africans, the situation requires urgent reform, urgent action, and deliberate and decisive leadership. We have to implement the necessary reforms, and we have to ignite real growth. Recently, I traveled to the UAE. Sure, this is not a democratic country, but you can't help but feel the sense at which what can be done within a short space of time. You can see the development. You can see the infrastructure growth. You can see what happens when there's a clear vision, resources, and an unrelenting focus on development. This is what South Africa can emulate. And it doesn't need to take decades. This I witnessed over a period of 1 decade. We need to be that. We need to have that 5% growth. So in that right, I want to focus on a few things. If this year, 2025, is going to be anything, it is going to be a year where economic recovery must take center stage. And I make the case to say it must be led by infrastructure development, which prioritizes transport for the people of this country, fixing networks like PRASA and national logistics is essential to stimulate trade, investment, and job creation. This cannot be left up to vibes. It must be something that says This is the key investment that we are going to put forward. I put before you that when South Africa invested in Gautrain, we saw the economic benefits of building mass transit infrastructure. Today, we've got communities like Midrand, the malls in those communities. We're seeing what the benefit of creating a transport hub can spin off to other economic activity. Now the question must hold. Imagine were we to roll that out across the country, ultimately ensuring that we expand reliable rail network to provinces like Northwest, Free State, Mpumalanga. These will be vital for future economic growth. Fellow South Africans, what we can least afford is for all of us to go to airports to discover that airports have run out of fuel, or drive on roads that bring poor infrastructure. We can, in partnership, both domestically and internationally, when we say South Africa is open for business, we must clarify what business. And I am saying today that that business must be transport-led, 5% economic growth that we focus on. If our currency is to weaken further, as we see the bilaterals between us and the US, we have to maximize what that means by focusing on exports to ensure that we boost economic growth. We have a unique opportunity. We have a moment that, as we've spoken, this is a time in the world where South Africa can lead so Africa can prosper. I've always proposed a Jobs and Justice Fund in order that we stimulate SMMEs and achieve a sense of justice in this country. This Jobs and Justice Fund must equally focus in how we transition our energy sector so that our energy sector is much more diverse and inclusive, resilient to climate change. I propose further that we extend opportunities in the expanded public works program so that all unemployed persons of working age can enroll in community service projects. It stays in line with our promise that we want a job in every home. Additionally, there should be a private sector initiative that could allow for unemployed individuals to take up work under similar wage and safety conditions. Fellow South Africans, I propose that we advocate for voluntary national civilian service that will bridge the transition from school to workplace. Let's give young people a year after school so that they can further develop their skills. Work in internship programs so that we nullify this idea that young people don't have experience. It'll give our matriculants who've just finished now powerful opportunities in healthcare, in education, in civil service, in policing, while earning an income. To achieve justice, as a child who has grown up in Dobsonville, Soweto, a township, I urge that townships must be declared special economic zones under the SEZ Act, enabling government to incentivize for businesses so that there can be a job closer to home. And at the same time, as I sit on the Portfolio Committee on Appropriations, I urge that we have a robust debt management strategy. It will be essential if we are going to stabilize our public finances. It cannot be such that we will spend 22 cents of every rand on servicing debt. This stifles out our opportunity to invest in healthcare, in education, in the Jobs and Justice Fund. Ultimately, it will mean we can reduce borrowing costs and prevent future generations from having to bail out current unsustainable conditions. I move further to say, let's revitalize our education sector. All of us, young people, parents, wake up every day with a dream that our kids will become better than what we were. I know it's a dream of every parent. I'm a father of 3 kids. And I always want to say, my kids must get further, as I had to with my own parents. I am a child of parents whose father worked in the factory and my mother was a cashier. So naturally, they wanted for their child to achieve better. This is a dream that every parent has for their kids. And our education system must ensure that this happens for all of our children. We need to reform our education system so that we can achieve a young people who are not only employable, but are able to compete with anyone in the world. To achieve this, I urge that we scrap the 30% pass mark, which lowers the academic standards. The goal should be to increase the number of Africans who are entering university from 4% to over 10% as things stand within a decade. Resources must be directed towards teacher training, a modernized curriculum, and vocational education to prepare students for a fast-growing global economy. The mantra for 2025 must be clear. Educate, educate, educate. Now is the time for change. Recently I went to a coffee shop to buy coffee. A young woman started to lament how actually she can't walk to work without feeling safe. How ultimately extortion rings are running around in townships. We all lament how gangs have come to settle in our communities and how 80 South Africans are being murdered every day. We must act to combat gang violence, gender-based violence, and drug abuse. So ultimately, Thursday is an opportunity to prioritize policing and public safety over the safety of politicians. We now have the largest cabinet with more blue lights, with more security per minister. Were we to cut the size of the cabinet, it could free up to 600 million rands that we could direct towards policing. This will require boldness, but it needs to face up to GNU partners to say, no, it's not politicians first, it's the people first. I urge again, let's cut the size of this cabinet. Fellow South Africans, local government is facing a real crisis. It is our foundation for fixing service delivery, yet it is plagued by corruption, inefficiencies, and a lack of accountability. The white paper on local government must be reviewed, and a new funding model must be implemented to ensure that municipalities are adequately resourced. Leadership audits must be conducted to ensure that competent officials hold key positions. Fixing local government is a non-negotiable if we are going to deliver basic services like water, sanitation, and electricity. I move towards building this capable state because it doesn't matter what dreams or hopes or aspirations you may hold. Your failure to have ethical leadership in government means that ultimately you are hampered in being able to deliver. So therefore, South Africa needs that. It needs a national dialogue that must just redefine the role and capability of the state, including a comprehensive audit of public institutions. This is not just about eliminating incompetence, but reimagining governance to serve citizens over political interests. I have continuously advocated for the Electoral Amendment Act, which must be amended to make sure that politicians are directly accountable to the people. As things stand now, you can be elected in a list and never know, never face the public, and actually, even in the constituency period that Parliament has, I'm often unclear what MPs do. Additionally, we must review our state-owned enterprises. If many of them are no longer viable, then we need to shut them down. Essentially, essential enterprises must be strengthened, with private-public partnership injected into entities like Transnet to stimulate trade and economic activity. As I close, fellow South Africans, it would be amiss of me not to address fundamentally this question that is taking place on our foreign policy. I urge President Ramaphosa to be decisive in bringing back our troops. When I arrived in Parliament, I raised the question about what our troops were doing in the DRC, and I got poor answers. and in many occasions, no answers. In other instances, we've found confusion and obfuscation. It is simply unsustainable for our troops to remain in the DRC. It comes with a cost of human life, and more seriously, it has seen us enter into a battlefield where more lives could be lost. We have no financial resources to equip our troops in the DRC, and they are left vulnerable. I say no more lives. Let's bring our troops back home. And secondly, to the question of the United States, I urge President Ramaphosa to engage President Trump as a matter of urgency, to bring clarity to the fact that we are not seeing the argument that has been made. I truly believe South Africans actually want justice. South Africans want land so that they can have economic prosperity. And all of that must operate within the Constitution. And the penalty that has been put to the people of South Africa is going to be impactful over the long run when a few individuals who felt it upon themselves to send misinformation, disinformation to the United States. We all as leaders in society, regardless of what party, what foundation we stand for, have the responsibility to represent the interests of the people of this country. To be a patriot is not only about what you do in South Africa, but it is about how you represent South Africa internationally. And so I urge that both on PEPFAR funding and equally so on trade tariffs, we have to have an urgent conversation, for this will have profound economic consequences for South Africa. As we host the G20 this year, it is going to be vital that not only is it an opportunity for South Africa to prosper, but for Africa to prosper. So therefore, in closing, on Thursday, President Ramaphosa must choose whether to fund the political elite or to put South Africans first, or to prioritize South Africans. We cannot afford a bloated government. We cannot afford these excessive international missions and wasteful spending while failing to provide for the poor citizens. What we need is more teachers, more nurses, more healthcare workers. We begin this hard work as Build One South Africa. We have a plan, we have the courage, and more importantly, we invite the people of South Africa. Let us advocate for change. We cannot afford a failed future. As I hear it in the streets, South Africans say to me all the time, we don't have a spare South Africa. We have to make this one work, and it has to work for all of us. So if we build a strong economy, build strong families, we can ensure that we fight violence, keep our children in school, and deliver a prosperous South Africa for all. It begins with us. It starts now. We are the ones we are waiting for. Let's get to work. Ke a leboga, and God bless you.